Okay, another book that I read in the past week was Cuba by Ada Ferrer. She's a professor of Latin American studies in the US. And in this book, she basically tells us the history of Cuba from 1511 to the current day. I learned a lot about how Cuba was first colonized by the Spanish Empire for over 300 to 400 years. And then, after the Spanish American War, Cuba was handed over to America along with Philippines and a couple of other places. So they literally had no say in that matter. Eventually, there came a point where there was an internal revolution, and that led to power being transferred to the local population, during which there was a military dictatorship, and then there was the rise of Castro and the new group that took over the country after. So over a 500-year timeline, you learn so much about, the politics of the country, the economics of the country, the social movements, the cultural movements. And I think Ada Ferrer does a really good job showing you how there are so many different things that can affect the history of a country in a 500-year timeline. And I knew nothing about Cuba before, but I slowly started realizing that a country is not only influenced by its internal politics, but also by the politics of the countries around it. Um, there's also this idea of the great individual theory of looking at history, and there were several individuals like Fulgencio Batista, Fidel Castro, who played pivotal roles in defining the history of this particular country. Also, economically, there were lots of resources that were really important to the country, like sugar, and the rights of workers in these factories became an important civil rights issue in that country over a long period. You also get to learn a lot about how Cuba was perceived from the American perspective, but also how it was perceived from a global perspective. So Ada Ferrer does a really good job, and it's a nonfiction book I really enjoyed, and it's an in-depth portrait of a country that went through a lot of change in the last 500 years.